3:17 a.m. That's the exact moment 4 armed officers kicked down the wrong door. And in exactly 43 seconds, they would realize they just made the worst mistake of their lives. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. The woman on the other side of that door? She'd spent the last 15 years hunting the most dangerous criminals in America. She'd interrogated terrorists, tracked down militia leaders, put away people who made hardened cops lose sleep at night. She had level 5 security clearance and direct access to the FBI director. And right now, she was face down on her living room floor in pajamas, with a knee in her back and handcuffs cutting into her wrists, screaming that they'd made a terrible mistake. They didn't believe her. They didn't even check. And when they finally walked into her bedroom and saw what was hanging on that wall, the lead officer's face went white. Another one actually whispered, "Oh God, no." The youngest cop looked like he might throw up, because what they found wasn't just proof they'd messed up. It was proof that their entire careers, everything they'd worked for, had just ended. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened that night. Every agonizing detail, every moment of terror, every second of humiliation. And by the end of this story, you're going to understand why this wasn't just a raid gone wrong. This was something much darker, much more calculated, and much more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. But first, you need to know who this woman really is. Because her story, what she'd been through, what she'd survived, what she'd sacrificed, makes what they did to her even more unforgivable. Her name is Dr. Amara Chen Williams, 38 years old, African American. 5'6" with natural hair, she wrapped carefully every single night in a silk bonnet, one of those small acts of self-care that kept her sane when her job meant diving into the minds of monsters. For 15 years, she'd been a supervisory special agent in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. That's the team that profiles serial killers, domestic terrorists, extremists, the people who keep the rest of us up at night. Amara was one of the best. The kind of agent other agents called when they hit a wall. The kind of mind that could look at a crime scene and see patterns no one else could see. She lived alone in a modest townhouse just outside Washington, D.C. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed federal agent. Just a quiet street with old oak trees and neighbors who knew her as the woman who always said good morning and never caused trouble. The woman who'd bring in your trash cans if you forgot. Who'd water your plants when you went on vacation. Normal, trustworthy, safe. But Amara's life was anything but normal. 3 years ago her husband died. He'd been Army, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, came home without a scratch both times. And then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a drunk driver ran a red light 2 miles from their house. Gone. Just like that. 15 years of marriage, all the plans they'd made, the life they were building, ended in a split second. She still wore his Georgetown Law t-shirt to bed sometimes. Still kept his medals in a shadow box next to their wedding photo. Still reached for him in the middle of the night and felt the emptiness where he used to be. Their daughter was away at college now. 20 years old, brilliant, studying criminal justice because she wanted to be just like her mom. They'd video call every few nights, and Amara would smile through her exhaustion, never letting her daughter see how heavy everything felt. How sometimes she'd sit in her car in the FBI parking garage for 20 minutes after her shift, just trying to remember how to be a person again instead of a hunter of human evil. On this particular night, the night that would change everything, Amara had followed her usual routine. Home by 7. Microwaved some leftover Thai food because cooking for one always felt depressing. Spread case files across her dining room table and dove in for 2 hours, her brilliant mind connecting dots, building profiles, hunting patterns in human darkness. At 10:30, her daughter called. They talked about an upcoming exam, about some drama with her roommate, about whether she should come home for Thanksgiving or stay on campus. Normal mom and daughter stuff. Amara laughed, really laughed, and for those 20 minutes, she wasn't Special Agent Chen Williams. She was just mom. After they hung up, she locked her case files in her home office safe. Protocol, always protocol. Brushed her teeth, wrapped her hair in that silk bonnet, and climbed into bed, wearing her late husband's Georgetown Law t-shirt and her favorite pajama pants. By midnight, she was asleep. But here's the piece of this puzzle that makes everything more sinister. Amara had been on administrative leave for 2 weeks, and she had no idea why. Her supervisors had been vague, something about an ongoing investigation, something about her safety, something about protocols that needed to be followed. She'd pushed back hard. Amara wasn't the type to just accept non-answers, but they'd stonewalled her. Take the time off, they said. Stay home. Don't ask questions. We'll handle this. So she stayed home, and she waited, and she had no idea that someone was counting on exactly that. At 3:17 a.m., everything exploded. The sound woke her first. Not loud yet, but wrong. You know that feeling when something pulls you from deep sleep and your brain immediately knows danger? That primal alarm that bypasses all rational thought? That's what hit Amara. Heavy footsteps outside. Multiple sets. Car doors closing with deliberate quiet, like people trying not to wake the neighborhood. The kind of sounds that don't belong at 3 in the morning on a residential street. Her eyes snapped open in complete darkness. Training kicked in before conscious thought. Her hand reached for her phone on the nightstand, but she didn't grab it yet. First rule: assess the situation. Know what you're dealing with before you react. She slipped out of bed, silent as a ghost, bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. Moved to her bedroom window and pulled the curtain back just an inch, just enough to see 3 unmarked SUVs, government plates, figures in full tactical gear, moving toward her front door with military precision. Her heart started slamming against her ribs. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. This was official. But official what? Her mind raced through possibilities like flipping through files. Had something happened to her daughter? No, notification teams don't dress like they're storming a compound. Was there a credible threat against her? Had someone from one of her cases tracked her down? But then why wouldn't they call first? Why wouldn't her own people warn her? She grabbed her phone, fingers trembling as she started to dial 911. She'd identify herself as FBI, find out what was happening, clear this up before it got. Boom. The battering ram hit her front door like a bomb going off. The entire house shook. Wood exploded inward. Metal shrieked as the frame gave way, and Amara screamed. She couldn't help it. A sound of pure animal terror as her door disintegrated and armed figures flooded into her home like a tactical invasion. 4 of them. 2 county sheriff's deputies. 2 local police. Moving fast and aggressive, weapons drawn, flashlight beams cutting through her living room like searchlights, turning everything familiar into something alien and terrifying. The lead officer was maybe mid-40s, crew cut going gray at the temples, the weathered face of a man who'd done this 1,000 times and never questioned it. His voice boomed through her house like a weapon itself. Police! Get on the ground! Get on the ground now! Amara stood frozen at the top of her stairs. Phone still clutched in her hand, silk bonnet knocked sideways on her head, wearing nothing but her dead husband's t-shirt and pajama pants. Her hands shot up on pure instinct, the universal language of "don't shoot, please don't kill me." What is happening? Her voice came out high and strangled, barely recognizable. I'm a federal agent. I'm FBI. They didn't stop, didn't pause, didn't even hesitate. Heavy boots pounded up her stairs. Multiple sets of hands grabbed her. Rough, violent, impersonal. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but her words were nothing against their shouted commands. They spun her around like she weighed nothing, slammed her face down on the cold hardwood floor of her own hallway. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Her glasses flew off her face and skittered across the floor. Her bonnet fell off completely, and she felt her hair against the wood, felt the raw humiliation of being stripped of even that small dignity. A knee pressed into her back, heavy, crushing, pinning her down like she was dangerous. Like she was the enemy. Metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists, too tight, biting into her skin hard enough to leave marks. She gasped for air, her cheek pressed against the floor that she'd cleaned just 2 days ago, and her mind couldn't process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening to her. There's a mistake, she managed to choke out, her voice muffled against the floor. I'm FBI. I'm a federal agent. My credentials are in my bag by the front door. Please, you need to check. There's been a mistake. But they weren't listening. They were already tearing through her home like a hurricane. She could hear it all. Drawers being yanked open and emptied. Books swept off shelves and hitting the floor. Her living room, her kitchen, her bedroom. Every private space she had violated by strangers who saw her as nothing more than a target. She could hear them in her bedroom now, going through her closet, her dresser, her most personal belongings. And Dr. Amara Chen Williams, a woman who'd spent 15 years in positions of power and authority, who'd interrogated terrorists without flinching, who'd stood in rooms with presidents and senators and commanded respect with just her presence, who'd never once doubted her place or her purpose, lay handcuffed and helpless on her own floor, treated like a criminal in her own home. The fear was overwhelming, absolute, all-consuming, but beneath it something else was building, something cold and sharp and dangerous. Because Amara knew the law better than most lawyers. She knew procedure. She knew her rights. She knew exactly what the Fourth Amendment said about unlawful search and seizure. And everything happening to her right now was illegal. Where is he? The lead officer's voice came from her living room, loud and aggressive. Where is Wei Cho? Amara shouted back, her voice breaking. I live alone. What is this about? We got a tip about this address. Armed individual. Possible drug operation. For a moment, Amara couldn't even process the words. Drug operation? Drug operation. She'd dedicated her entire adult life to law enforcement. She'd taken an oath. She'd bled for justice. And they were accusing her of running drugs? I'm a federal agent, she screamed. And she'd never heard her own voice sound like that before. Desperate, terrified, furious all at once. My credentials are in my bag by the door. Check them. Yeah, sure they are, one of the officers muttered. Heard that before. And that's when Amara realized they didn't care who she was. They'd already decided what she was. If you want to see how this situation goes from bad to absolutely unbelievable, you need to subscribe right now. Because what these officers are about to find in her bedroom will haunt them for the rest of their lives. And here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where no one would listen to you, no matter what you said? Drop your story in the comments and tell me from where you're watching this story right now in the comment. The officers kept searching, kept destroying. One of them found her work bag by the door and started rifling through it. Another was in her bedroom, another in her kitchen. The lead officer stood over her, watching her like she might somehow become dangerous despite being handcuffed and face down on the floor. And then, from the bedroom, a voice, you need to see this. The tone had changed. Something in it made everyone stop. Amara, still on the floor, her wrists screaming from the too tight cuffs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest, heard footsteps moving toward her bedroom. Heard the lead officer's boots on her stairs, heard the silence that followed. And she knew, they'd just seen the wall. The FBI jacket with her name embroidered on it, the framed credentials, the commendations from the director, the photo with the former president, the shadow box with her husband's medals and folded flag, the entire wall of evidence that proved exactly who she was and what she'd sacrificed. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours, and then quietly, almost like a prayer. Oh God, what did we just do? Now here's where the story goes from terrifying to absolutely enraging. Because even after finding her FBI credentials, even after seeing that wall of evidence, these officers still weren't ready to admit what they'd done. And Amara, still handcuffed, still treated like a criminal, was about to watch them scramble to cover their tracks in real time. They pulled her up off the floor, not gently, just hauled her to her feet and moved her to the couch in her living room like she was a piece of furniture they needed out of the way. She sat there, hands still cuffed behind her back, wrists burning, watching these men continue to destroy her home. And the worst part? They were moving even faster now. More desperate, like they were searching for something, anything, that would justify what they'd just done. Deputy Reed, the lead officer, the one with the crew cut and 15 years of experience who should have known better, he was in her kitchen now, yanking open every cabinet, pulling out pots and pans, dumping her silverware drawer onto the counter. Looking for what? Drugs? Weapons? Evidence that would make this nightmare somehow okay? Another officer was in her living room, pulling books off her shelves. Hardcovers, paperbacks, textbooks from her graduate studies, all of it crashing to the floor. He was flipping through them, shaking them out, like maybe she'd hollowed out a copy of Behavioral Psychology to hide contraband. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so degrading. Officer Kowalski, younger guy, late 20s, probably still thought he was one of the good guys. He was going through her work bag by the door. And Amara watched him with cold, calculating eyes. She was cataloging everything now, every violation, every illegal action, because her fear was transforming into something else. Something sharper. And then there was the one going through her bedroom. She could hear him in there, opening drawers, going through her clothes. Her clothes. The intimacy of that violation made her stomach turn. This stranger was touching things her late husband had bought for her, was handling her personal items like he had any right to be there. Reed came back into the living room, frustration written all over his face. He stared down at Amara and she stared right back. No fear now, just cold fury. "Where is he?" Reed demanded. Amara's voice came out steady, controlled, deadly calm. "Where's WHO? I live alone. What is this actually about? We got a tip about suspicious activity at this address. Armed individual, possible drug operation." And there it was again. Drug operation. Amara felt things snap inside her. Drug operation? Her voice rose, all that control shattering. "I'm a federal agent. My credentials are in my bag by the door. My FBI badge is right there. My service weapon is locked in my safe upstairs. I have level 5 security clearance. I've spent 15 years hunting terrorists. And you think I'm running drugs?" Reed's jaw tightened. He looked away. Sure, heard that before. That dismissal. That casual, arrogant dismissal. Like her 15 years of service, her sacrifice, her entire career meant nothing because he'd already decided who and what she was. Amara noticed something then. Her eyes, sharp even without her glasses, scanned the officers. "Where are your body cameras?" The officers exchanged glances. Quick, uncomfortable looks. "Where are your body cameras?" she repeated, louder this time. "Where's your warrant?" "You kicked down my door without announcing yourselves properly, without a warrant, without any attempt to verify who lives here. Where are your body cameras?" Silence. Heavy, guilty silence. And then she noticed something else. "Your county sheriff's deputies. This is outside your jurisdiction. Who authorized this raid? Who sent you here?" More silence. And in that silence, Amara felt the power dynamic beginning to shift. Just slightly, just enough. Can you believe they won't even check her ID? They have her FBI credentials right there, and they're still treating her like a criminal. What would you do in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Officer Kowalski was still going through her work bag, and then his hands stopped. His whole body went still. Amara watched as he pulled something out, something that caught the light. Her FBI credentials. The leather case with her badge and identification. The real thing. Undeniable. Official. His face changed. The color drained out of it. Reed? Reed was busy in the kitchen, still searching, still desperate. "What? You need to see this." Kowalski's voice was quiet now, scared. He held up the credential case, and even from across the room Amara could see Reed's expression shift. The deputy crossed the room in 3 long strides and snatched the credentials from Kowalski's hands. He held them under the flashlight beam, examining them closely, looking for any sign they were fake, any excuse to dismiss them. The pause stretched out. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Amara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "I tried to tell you." Reed looked up, and for the first time there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Could be fake. Lots of fake badges out there." Amara almost laughed. Almost. "Check the serial number. Call the FBI field office. I'll wait. I've got nowhere to go. I'm still in handcuffs in my own home." Her voice was ice now. All the fear had burned away, leaving only controlled fury. This was the woman who'd interrogated terrorists, who'd stared down killers and never blinked. That woman was back. Reed's hand shook just slightly as he held the credentials. He knew. Deep down, he knew. But admitting it meant admitting what they'd done. What he'd authorized. And then another voice came from down the hallway. Detective Liang, the third officer, Asian American, maybe in his 50s, state police. He'd been quiet this whole time, staying back, watching. Now his voice cut through the tension. Reed, you need to see the bedroom. The way he said it, the tone. Everyone in that room knew something had shifted. Reed moved toward the bedroom like a man walking to his own execution. Kowalski followed. Even the officer who'd been searching the kitchen trailed after them. They all needed to see. They all needed to know just how badly they'd screwed up. Amara sat on her couch, still handcuffed, listening to the silence from her bedroom. She knew what they were seeing. That wall. Her entire career laid out like evidence in a trial, undeniable, irrefutable, real. The FBI jacket hanging there with her name embroidered right on it. SSAA Chen Williams. Supervisory Special Agent, not just an agent, a supervisor. Someone with authority, someone with power. Her FBI Academy graduation photo framed from 15 years ago. Younger, idealistic, believing the system worked. Commendations from the FBI director. Multiple letters of recognition. Awards for her work on counterterrorism cases. Each one representing hours of work, months of investigation, years of dedication. A photo of her with a former president at a White House ceremony. She'd been honored for her role in stopping a domestic terrorist plot. The president had shaken her hand, thanked her for her service. That photo hung on her wall as a reminder of why she did this work. Her husband's shadow box. His military medals, the folded flag from his funeral, the bronze star he'd earned in Afghanistan. All of it there, telling the story of her family's sacrifice. And a photo of her daughter, smiling, wearing an FBI t-shirt from Bring Your Kid to Work Day when she was 12. The day she decided she wanted to be just like her mom. The silence from the bedroom was absolute. Suffocating. And then she heard it. Sergeant Torres, the fourth officer, the one who'd been quiet this whole time, the veteran cop who probably knew better than all of them. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence, Amara heard every word. Oh God. The officers came back into the living room one by one. Reed first, his face completely drained of color. He looked like he might be sick. Kowalski behind him, eyes wide, looking younger than his years. Detective Liang, his expression unreadable but professional, already calculating what came next. And Torres, shaking his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. They all looked at Amara. Really looked at her. And for the first time since they'd kicked down her door, they saw her. Not as a target, not as a suspect, but as exactly who she'd been telling them she was all along. Amara's voice came from the couch, quiet and cold and absolutely in control now. Found something interesting? No one answered. Because what could they say? What words existed that could fix what they'd just done? The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had completely inverted. These four officers, with their weapons and their authority and their tactical gear, suddenly understood they were standing in the home of someone who outranked them. Someone with connections they couldn't imagine. Someone who knew the law better than they did. Someone who could end their careers with a single phone call. And they'd handcuffed her, thrown her to the ground, violated her rights, destroyed her home, all while she'd been telling them the truth. Reed moved toward Amara slowly, like approaching something dangerous. His hands fumbled with his keys, finding the one for the handcuffs. He wouldn't look at her, couldn't look at her. Ma'am, he started, his voice completely different now. Careful, professional, scared. There's been a misunderstanding. We received intelligence about this address. The handcuffs clicked open. Amara felt them release from her wrists, felt the blood rush back into her hands. She brought her arms forward slowly, rubbing at the red marks the cuffs had left. Deep indentations in her skin. Evidence. She noted them carefully. Reed was still talking, his voice taking on that false professional tone that people use when they know they're in trouble and are trying to sound reasonable. We received intelligence about this address. Amara cut him off. Just stopped him cold with 2 words. Intelligence? She stood up, retrieved her glasses from where they'd fallen and put them back on. Everything came into sharp focus. The destruction of her home. The guilty faces of 4 officers who knew they'd crossed a line. The mess they'd made of her life. Or did someone give you an address and you didn't bother to verify? Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. Amara walked slowly through her living room, taking it all in. Books scattered across the floor. Drawers pulled out and emptied. Her personal belongings treated like garbage. Her voice was steady, but there was something simmering underneath it. Something dangerous. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights. No warrant presented. No exigent circumstances. No announcement of purpose. No attempt to verify occupant information before you decided to use a battering ram on my front door at 3 in the morning. She turned to face them, and every single officer looked away. I'm a constitutional law expert, gentlemen. I've testified before Congress on domestic terrorism and civil liberties. I know exactly what you did wrong. And I know exactly how many laws you just broke. She walked over to where a photo frame had been knocked over during their search. She picked it up carefully. The glass was cracked, spiderwebbing across the image. It was a photo of her and her husband on their wedding day. He was in his dress uniform, she was in white, both of them smiling like they had their whole lives ahead of them. Her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to show she was still human under all that controlled fury. This was his house. He bought it with his deployment bonuses. He died serving this country. 15 years in the army, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home without a scratch. And then? She stopped herself, took a breath, collected her composure. And you come in here like you're raiding a drug cartel. Officer Kowalski stepped forward, his young face full of genuine remorse. Ma'am, we're sorry. This was... Amara's head snapped toward him, her voice sharp as a blade. Are your body cameras on? The officers exchanged glances. That guilty look again. Are your body cameras on? She repeated, enunciating each word. Sergeant Torres, the veteran cop, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, defeated. They malfunctioned before we entered. Amara let out a bitter laugh. It was a harsh sound, completely devoid of humor. Of course they did. How convenient. 4 body cameras. All malfunctioned at exactly the same time, right before you kicked down a federal agent's door. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos. The broken door frame, the destroyed living room, the empty drawers, the scattered books, every angle, every piece of evidence. The officers watched her do it and didn't say a word. What could they say? She had every right. Reed tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. Ma'am, please, let's talk about this. Talk? Amara spun on him, and he actually took a step back. You want to talk? You kicked down my door. You terrorized me in my own home. You put your knee in my back and handcuffed me while I was in my pajamas. You went through my bedroom, my clothes, my personal belongings, my late husband's things, and now you want to talk? Her voice rose with each sentence, all that control finally starting to crack. Get out of my house. No one moved. They just stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do, because leaving meant facing what came next. And they all knew what came next. But then Amara stopped. Her phone was still in her hand, finger hovering over the screen, ready to make the call that would end their careers. But something crossed her face. A thought. A realization. Her brilliant analytical mind, the one that had solved cases everyone else had given up on, started working. She lowered the phone slowly. Anonymous tip, she said, more to herself than to them. 2:45 a.m. This address specifically. She looked up at Reed. What was the exact description in the tip? Reed hesitated. He knew every word he said now was evidence against him, but he also knew he was past the point of no return. Caller said black male, 30s, dreadlocks, carrying duffel bags. In and out of the address multiple times. Possible drug packaging operation. Amara's face hardened. Black male. And you didn't think to verify? To do surveillance? To check property records? To see if maybe, possibly, the tip was wrong? Detective Leung stepped in, trying to de-escalate. Agent Chen Williams, we followed protocol for an emergency situation. You followed nothing. Amara's voice was ice. You got a call about a black person and you kicked down a door. That's what you did. You took an anonymous tip, which by the way, is not sufficient probable cause for a warrantless entry, and you decided that was enough. She was pacing now, her mind working through something. The officers watched her, increasingly uncomfortable. Did the caller give a name for the resident? She asked suddenly. The officers shook their heads. Did the caller give any specific details about the alleged drug operation? Times? Amounts? Anything verifiable? More headshakes. Did you run the address through any database before you came here? Did you check to see who owned the property? Who lived here? Did you do even 5 minutes of basic investigation? The silence was answer enough. Amara stopped pacing. She turned to look at them, and something in her expression had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that made the officers even more nervous. Fear. Not of them. Fear of what she'd just figured out. "I've been on administrative leave for 2 weeks," she said slowly, thinking out loud. "How many people know that?" The officers didn't answer. They didn't understand where she was going with this. How many people know that I'd be home, that I'd be alone, that my daughter is away at college, that I'm here every night by myself, with no one to corroborate what happens? Her voice dropped, became almost a whisper, but in the destroyed quiet of her home, every word was clear. Someone knew I'd be home. Someone knew I'd be alone. She looked at each officer in turn. Anonymous tip at 2:45 a.m. That's oddly specific. Middle of the night, early enough that I'd be in deep sleep, late enough that neighbors wouldn't be awake to see what happened. And you show up at 3:17. That's 32 minutes, just enough time to assemble a team and get here. Almost like someone knew exactly how long it would take. Reed's face had gone pale. "Agent Chen Williams, what are you saying?" Amara turned to him, and her eyes were hard. "I'm saying this wasn't random. I'm saying someone called in that tip knowing exactly what would happen. Knowing you'd come here with weapons drawn. Knowing you'd kick down my door. Knowing I'd be alone and vulnerable and terrified." She took a step toward Reed. "I'm saying someone just used you as a weapon, and you let them. You didn't question it. You didn't verify it. You just followed orders and hoped for the best." The weight of what she was implying settled over the room like a physical presence. "Who dispatched this raid?" she asked quietly. "Who specifically sent you to this address?" Reed opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Sheriff's office. We got the call direct from dispatch." "Name," Amara demanded. "I want a name. Who called you personally?" Reed's face went even paler. "The sheriff. He called me directly on my cell at 2:30 a.m. And there it was, the final piece clicking into place. Amara's expression shifted from anger to something much more dangerous. Understanding. Because suddenly this whole thing made horrible, perfect sense. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "All of you. Get out of my house. Now." This time they moved, because the look on her face told them that whatever they'd stumbled into was much bigger than a botched raid. They'd been used, manipulated, turned into weapons in someone else's war. And the woman standing in front of them, the one they'd handcuffed and humiliated, was about to go to war right back. As the officers filed out through her destroyed doorway, Amara stood in the wreckage of her home, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She knew who was behind this. She knew why, and she knew exactly what she was going to do about it. But first, she had a phone call to make. And by the time the sun came up, a lot of people were going to wish they'd never heard the name Dr. Amara Chen Williams. Amara stood in the wreckage of her home, and something had shifted. The fear was gone. The humiliation had burned away. What remained was the federal agent, the woman who'd spent 15 years hunting people who thought they were untouchable. And right now, standing there in her pajamas, surrounded by the destruction these officers had caused, she was hunting again. Her voice cut through the silence like a command. "I need to hear that 911 call. Now." Reed's face went even paler. "That's evidence in an ongoing. You just committed a federal civil rights violation in my home." Amara's voice was steel. "You terrorized a federal agent. You destroyed my property without a warrant. You assaulted me. Get me that recording." Detective Leong stepped forward, and unlike the others, his expression was professional, controlled. He'd been watching this whole thing unfold, and he'd clearly come to a decision. "I can have dispatch send it. But agent, I need to ask, why would someone target you specifically?" Amara hesitated. Because answering that question meant revealing information about an ongoing case. But she was past the point of protocol. Someone had just tried to have her killed, or arrested, or discredited, and she needed these officers to understand what they'd walked into. 2 weeks ago, she said slowly, I arrested someone, a case I'd been working for 18 months. She turned and walked to her home office. The door was open, they'd searched it too. Inside, her desk had been ransacked, her file cabinets forced open. The officers had actually cut the lock on one of her secured drawers. She reached in and pulled out a thick file folder, classified material, case documents she should never show to local police. But nothing about this night was by the book anymore. She walked back to the living room and held up the file. County Commissioner James Hartley, money laundering, connections to militia groups, funneling county funds to extremist organizations. I was the lead investigator on the task force that took him down. The officers' faces changed, all of them, because they recognized that name. Everyone in law enforcement in this county knew that name. Torres, the veteran cop who'd been quiet most of the night, his voice came out rough. Hartley's brother is the county sheriff. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Because suddenly, every single person in that room understood what had happened. Why this raid had been authorized. Why Reed had been called personally. Why the body cameras had malfunctioned. Why everything about this operation had been off-book and wrong. Amara watched the realization dawn on their faces. Now you're starting to understand. The adrenaline was overriding everything now. The fear, the exhaustion, the shock. Her mind was working at full speed, the way it did when she was deep in a case, connecting dots that no one else could see. Hartley made bail 4 days ago, she continued, her voice getting stronger. Since then, I've had 3 different cars following me, different makes, different models, but always there. Hang-up calls at 2 a.m. every single night, waking me up, making sure I couldn't sleep, keeping me on edge. Someone going through my trash. My neighbors noticed. I documented everything. She pulled out her phone, started scrolling through photos, license plates, timestamps, images of cars parked outside her house at odd hours. I reported it to my field office. Every single incident. They put me on administrative leave, said it was for my safety while they investigated whether Hartley was violating his bail conditions. She looked up at Reed, and her eyes were hard. Administrative leave, which means anyone checking would know I wasn't at work, would know I was home, alone, vulnerable. Reed's hands were shaking now, actually shaking. The tip came from a burner phone, untraceable number. I checked after we got here. Of course it did. Amara's voice was bitter, because this was planned. Carefully, methodically, they wanted me arrested. Or better yet, they wanted me shot. Either way, I'm discredited. The case against Hartley gets muddied. His defense attorneys claim the lead FBI investigator is unstable, paranoid, that the investigation was flawed from the beginning. Maybe they even get the case thrown out. Kowalski, the young officer who'd been the first to find her credentials, his voice came out barely above a whisper. We almost killed you. The weight of that statement hung in the air, because it was true. If Amara had moved wrong, if she'd reached for something, if one of these officers had been more nervous, more trigger-happy, this story would have ended very differently. She'd be dead. Shot in her own home by officers who thought they were doing their job. Amara turned to Reed, and her voice was quiet but intense. How long have you worked for the county sheriff's office? 15 years. You know Sheriff Hartley personally? Reed's jaw tightened. We've worked together. That doesn't mean. Who dispatched this raid? Amara cut him off. Who specifically assigned you to come to this address at 3 in the morning? Reed didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because they both knew what the answer was, and saying it out loud would be an admission of just how deep this went. The tension in the room had shifted again. It wasn't just about the botched raid anymore. This was bigger. This was corruption at the highest levels. And these 4 officers were standing in the middle of it, realizing they'd been used as weapons in someone else's war. Detective Leong spoke up, and his voice was careful, measured. Agent Chen Williams, I need to be clear about something. I'm state police, not county. I was attached to this operation about an hour ago. Reed called for state backup for what he described as a high-risk warrant execution. Amara looked at Reed. But there was no warrant. Reed was sweating now, actually sweating, despite the cool air coming through her broken door. I was told the sheriff said it was expedited, verbal authorization from the judge due to time sensitivity. He said the paperwork would follow, that we needed to move fast before the suspect fled. Torres shook his head slowly. That's not a thing, Reed. You know that's not how warrants work. You've been doing this 15 years. You know you can't execute a raid on verbal authorization. There are protocols. There are rules. Reed's voice cracked. Sheriff Hartley called me personally at 2:30 a.m. On my cell phone, he said we had credible intelligence that this was urgent, that lives were at stake. He's my boss. I've known him 20 years. I trusted him. And you didn't question it, Amara said quietly. Not an accusation, a statement of fact. Reed looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes besides defensiveness or fear. She saw shame. Deep, genuine shame. He's my boss, he repeated, but this time his voice was hollow. I've followed his orders for 15 years. I never had a reason not to trust him. Until tonight, Amara said. Until tonight, Reed agreed. The officers looked at each other, a silent conversation happening between them, because they were at a crossroads now. They could walk away, try to cover this up, hope that Amara would be too worried about her own career to push back. Or they could do the right thing, even though the right thing meant ending their careers, turning on their boss, admitting they'd been complicit in something terrible. It was Detective Liam who broke the silence. He pulled out his phone and held it up. Everyone stop. Right now, we document everything. He started moving through Amara's home, taking photos. The broken door, the destroyed living room, the scattered belongings, the forced locks. Every piece of evidence of what had been done here. Agent, he said, his voice formal now, official, I'm placing a call to the FBI field office and to the State Attorney General's office. This stops here, right now. Whatever we walked into tonight, whatever we were used for, it ends now. Reed's face went white. Wait, let's think about this. Maybe we can. Torres cut him off and his voice was hard. Final. No, Reed. We screwed up. We fix it. That's what we do. That's what we're supposed to do. Kowalski pulled out his personal phone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady as he hit record. For the record, I'm Officer Kowalski, badge number 2847. At approximately 3:17 a.m. on this date, we executed an unauthorized entry into the residence of Dr. Amara Chen Williams, a federal agent with the FBI. We had no warrant. We had no proper authorization. We were acting on orders from County Sheriff Michael Hartley based on an unverified anonymous tip. We used a battering ram to breach the door. We handcuffed Agent Chen Williams. We searched her home without consent or legal authority. We violated her civil rights. His voice shook on that last sentence, but he kept going, kept documenting every detail, every mistake, every violation. Amara stood there, still in her pajamas, still in shock, still processing what had happened to her. But she was watching these officers, and she recognized something she'd seen before in her work. Courage. Real courage. The kind that costs you everything. Because these men were ending their careers right now, in real time, documenting their own misconduct, turning on their boss, doing the right thing even though it would destroy them. And despite everything, despite the terror and the humiliation and the violation, Amara felt something like respect. Dawn was breaking. Amara could see the first light coming through her broken doorway, painting her destroyed living room in shades of gray and gold. And with that light came everything else. FBI vehicles. Black SUVs with government plates pulling up outside her townhouse. Agents she'd worked with for years spilling out, weapons ready, securing the scene. Because one of their own had been attacked, and the Bureau took care of its own. Amara stood on her front step, and someone had given her an FBI windbreaker to put on over her pajamas. She looked exhausted, traumatized, but also somehow stronger than she'd been before all this started. Because she'd survived. And now everyone would know what had been done to her. The assistant director of the Washington field office stood beside her, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. State prosecutors were there too, documenting everything, taking statements. This wasn't just a botched raid anymore. This was a federal civil rights case. This was corruption. This was conspiracy. Reed and two other county officers sat in separate vehicles, being questioned. Their careers were over. They knew it. But at least they'd done the right thing in the end. At least they'd told the truth. Detective Leong and Sergeant Torres stood off to the side, giving their statements to state investigators. They'd be okay. They'd made the choice to document everything, to call it in, to not be complicit in the cover-up. That would save them. Not completely. They'd still face questions about why they'd participated in an unauthorized raid, but they'd walked away from the corruption when it mattered. That counted for something. Amara's neighbors were starting to come out, drawn by the lights in the vehicles and the obvious presence of law enforcement. An older woman from next door approached one of the FBI agents, her voice shaking as she described what she'd heard. The crash. The shouting. The terror of thinking something terrible was happening to the quiet woman who'd lived next to her for 5 years. "She's the nicest person," the neighbor said, tears in her eyes. "Always says hello, brought me soup when I was sick, watered my plants when I went to visit my grandkids, and they treated her like a criminal. We heard everything. It was terrifying." And then a car pulled up, driving way too fast, tires screeching as it stopped. A young woman jumped out, Amara's daughter. 20 years old, still in her college sweatshirt, her face streaked with tears. She'd driven through the night to get here, not caring about speed limits or exhaustion. Just needing to get to her mother. "Mom!" Her voice broke on the word. Amara turned, and whatever composure she'd been holding on to shattered. Her daughter ran to her, and they collided in an embrace that was all desperation and relief and love. "Mom, I could have lost you." Her daughter was sobbing now, couldn't get the words out. "When the FBI called me, when they said what happened, I thought." "I'm okay," Amara whispered, holding her daughter tight. "I'm here. I'm okay." And for the first time since that door had exploded inward at 3:17 a.m., Amara let herself cry. Really cry. All the fear and trauma and violation pouring out while her daughter held her, and FBI agents and state prosecutors and neighbors watched, and the morning sun kept rising like nothing had happened. Like the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. News vans were setting up down the street now, because this story was too big to contain. Federal agent terrorized in her own home. County sheriff implicated in conspiracy. Officers used as weapons against an innocent woman. This was going to be everywhere. And as the day went on, as more details emerged, the dominoes started falling. Sheriff Michael Hartley was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His brother, Commissioner James Hartley, had his bail revoked and faced additional charges: witness intimidation, conspiracy, abuse of power. The case Amara had built against him wasn't just intact, it was stronger now. Because now everyone could see how desperate he'd been to stop her, how far he'd been willing to go. 1 week later, Amara stood in her doorway. A new door, new frame, professionally installed. Her home had been cleaned up, repaired, put back together as much as it could be. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some violations left marks that no amount of repair work could erase. She'd been asked to testify before a grand jury to tell her story, to make sure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. And she'd agreed. Because that's what you did. You took the trauma and the pain and the fear, and you turned it into something that mattered, something that changed things. Her voice, recorded for the record, played over images of her life in the aftermath. "I spent 15 years enforcing the law. I took an oath to protect and serve, to uphold justice. But that night I learned what it feels like when the law is weaponized against you, when the people sworn to protect become the threat. When everything you believed about the system gets tested in the most brutal way possible." Fellow agents came by to check on her, brought food, offered support, let her know she wasn't alone. Community members she'd never met reached out, sharing their own stories of doors kicked in, of rights violated, of dignity stripped away. Advocacy groups contacted her, wanting her to speak, to share her story, to be a voice for others who'd experienced the same thing. Amara went back to work, walked into the FBI building with her head high and her badge visible. Because they hadn't broken her. They'd tried. They'd done everything they could to destroy her credibility, her career, her sense of safety. And they'd failed. Her voiceover continued. They thought breaking down my door would break me. Instead, it broke their system of silence. It exposed the corruption they'd built. It showed everyone what happens when power goes unchecked. And it reminded me why I do this work. Not for the system that failed me, but for every person who's ever been on the wrong side of that door. Every person who's ever screamed that they were innocent and nobody listened. Every person who's ever had their life destroyed by people who were supposed to protect them. The final shot was simple. Amara's FBI badge sitting on her desk, the metal gleaming under office lights, proof that she was still here. Still fighting, still standing. On-screen text appeared. Deputy Reed and 2 other county officers face federal charges for civil rights violations. Detective Leong and Sergeant Torres testified for the prosecution and faced disciplinary action, but remained in law enforcement. Sheriff Michael Hartley was arrested on charges of conspiracy and abuse of power. Commissioner James Hartley was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Dr. Amara Chen Williams continues her work fighting domestic terrorism and advocates for law enforcement reform. And then, in simple white text on black, when those sworn to protect abuse their power, courage isn't just fighting back. It's making sure it never happens to anyone else. This story is dedicated to everyone who's had their door kicked in, their dignity stripped away, and still found the strength to demand justice. If this story opened your eyes to how quickly everything can go wrong, even for those within the system, hit that subscribe button for more stories about justice, courage, and the fight for what's right. And I want to know, do you think the officers who came forward and documented everything redeemed themselves? Or should they have faced the same consequences as those who tried to cover it up? This is a complicated question with no easy answer. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because Amara's story didn't end that night. It's still going, still making a difference, still proving that even when the system fails you, even when those in power try to destroy you, even when you're face down on your floor in handcuffs in your own home, you can still fight back. You can still win. You can still make them answer for what they've done. And sometimes justice doesn't come from the system. It comes from people brave enough to stand up and say, "This is wrong. This stops here. This ends now." That's what Amara did. And that's why her story matters.